There's gonna be a fight tonight.
And thanks again for joining us, folks, here on the Cassius Morris Show. I'm very humbled today to be speaking with a legendary rock and roll frontman. He has his own self-titled band and podcast, and both are one of the best in their field. And his new album, Wildcat, comes out on March 3rd. It's Danko Jones, everybody. Hey.
Hey, Cassius. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for calling in today. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So you must be super busy right now. You guys got a tour coming up and the new record. So talk to me about that. Does it feel good to be putting some new music out there?
Yeah, it's been 2 years since our last album, Fire Music, and that did really well for us. So we were happy about the results. And then we recorded it with Eric Ratz, and we did it at Vespa Music, and we did it at Revolution Studios, both studios in Toronto. And it's Rich and JC and myself. Everything that went into making Fire Music is what we put into making Wildcat, the new record. So again, just like Fire Music, the results are in, and people seem to be really digging the whole album. The people that have heard it, and the people that have heard the new single, the first single, My Little R&R, they're really enjoying it too. So, no complaints.
Yeah, I have no complaints either. I've heard the new single, and I'm definitely digging it. And that's one thing I did notice about the single is that it stays true to that awesome, super clear, crisp Danko Jones production sound. Is it important to you to produce your albums in Canada?
Mainly because, we want to be home when we're recording it. For morale, there's nothing better than being at home and being able to sleep in your own bed while you're, doing something as big as an album. We've done it where we've been away, and, there's something to be said for just kind of being, restful mentally and just knowing you're at home. We spend so much time on the road that when we are able to do a record at home, we're lucky. We live in Toronto. There's a lot of great studios and a lot of great, people who live in Toronto who make records, like Eric Ratz. He's based out of Toronto. So, Eric's, no slouch. The bands that he's done, Cancer Bats, Monster Truck, Billy Talent, all those bands were done by Eric, and it's based out of Toronto. So it's easy for us, there's something to be said for being able to go home after a hard day's work and sleep in your own bed for a change when you're doing something like something as creative as making an album.
Yeah, I could imagine it would be a lot more restful to be able to kind of go home and then put more effort into the actual music that you're making.
Yeah, and it's also a mental rest as well. When you're on the road, a lot of people who don't tour don't realize that it's also a mental juggling act. You have to make sure that you can keep your mind on the show that night, even though, maybe something's happening at home, far away from home, friends and family, who knows? So the chance to just do everything at home, keeps your mind on the game. You could play better, you could sing better, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Talk to me about that touring life, though, because you guys are on the road quite a bit. You look at you guys' website. What's a typical day like on tour?
Well, once you're in the thick of it, I think it takes about a week and a half to really kind of get used to the fact that you're on tour and get a routine down. Also, get rid of jet lag. So once that's kind of, going and you got a routine going, I usually just kind of wake up and there's usually, grab something for breakfast or brunch usually is the case, and coffee, and then away you go. Get settled in your dressing room. And I'm pretty much the kind of guy who, once I got my laptop out, I'm pretty much on there till sound check and till the show. We've been touring for so long. I'm not like, people always ask me, oh, do you get to see the sights of all these cities that you visit? Man, it's not a vacation.
Yeah.
I'm here to do a job. And if I expend energy trying to take in the sights, that just makes the show that evening, just that less energetic. So I kind of really conserve my energy for the show, kind of like a caged animal, so to speak, and get it all out while the show's happening. And, as much as, I maybe have started to do this to see the world, I don't get to see the world too much because I'm always in the club, in the dressing room. But I don't mind. This is what I do for a living. I play rock and roll. I don't vacation for a living. So that's what I do. When the time is for a vacation, well, then maybe I'll take in the sights. But other than that, I'm there to do a job and do it the best I can.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it. And I find that the artists that actually look at it that way tend to be, quite a lot more successful. And it seems like people who listen to music have preconceived notions about kind of what being in a rock band means and what touring means. And they don't really seem to put together that, or some people don't at least, that this is you guys' job. And, just because they're listening to music when they're done with their job to kind of get that release, this is you guys' way of employment.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have their idea of, being in a rock band is from older bands, the times when rock and roll was the most popular form of music.
We're a band, man. We hang out, we go in, we jam, we hang out. It's like, and we listen to rap records, and now we're doing this stuff.
These days, rock and roll isn't even the third most popular form of music. It isn't even the fourth or fifth. I think it's more like seventh or eighth most popular form of music. So, that just has less amount of people who are interested in it. And as a rock band, you're lucky to have the people who come to your shows. We've been very lucky over the years to be able to tour, and we've watched our audience grow, which is actually something that I don't take lightly. I'm very grateful for that happening. But I mean, if you were to compare how rock and roll, the popularity of rock and roll back, maybe 2-3 decades ago, well, I mean, there was lots of bands filling, arenas. You don't see as many arena bands anymore, So with that comes a lot of, personal assistance. If you lose your wallet or you lose your phone or you want to go and see the sights here, well, someone will drive you back and someone will find your wallet and or get you a new one, or it doesn't really matter, or just take care of your mess. These days, being in a rock and roll band, it isn't really like that. You're left to your own devices. There's a great divide between, A-level type bands that can fill stadiums or arenas, and B-level type bands like us that can fill clubs. There's a huge gap. And with that gap, comes, we don't have the luxury of taking things for granted or having personal assistance. And I think that kind of image has followed rock and roll, especially down through the decades and through the years, where people automatically assume that if you're in a rock and roll band, you're a multimillionaire and you've got personal assistants and, you can vacation here and you've got, a chauffeur to drive you everywhere. It's not really like that.
Well, that's super interesting. And even I didn't realize it to that extent. Do you feel like that aspect of it, do you feel like it keeps you more grounded in a way?
Well, I mean, we've been at this level now for so long. I mean, I'm as grounded, I think, as you can possibly get. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that bad. We're not, squatting on someone's floor or sleeping on people's couches.
Yeah.
We do pretty good. And I'm grateful for that. Like I said, I don't think rock and roll is the most popular form of music. There's EDM, there's pop music, there's rap music, there's heavy metal is even more popular than rock and roll. I mean, rock and punk rock, more popular. Rock and roll bands, I mean, anyone can name 10 rock and roll bands that they know, but most of those bands are established iconic entities that have been around for 20 years or more. Name me 10 bands, rock and roll bands, that are at least at a B level like us that have been around for the last 10 years. And I think most people will have a harder time coming up with 10. They might come up with 3 or 4, but 10? And so, that's kind of, I'm starting to realize this over the years. Like, why are we so misunderstood? Why are we so miscategorized? Why do we get, slotted here and there, but never where I feel it's right? And that's because I think rock and roll is just so misunderstood as a type of music. And I had you on my podcast as well. And a future episode I will have, the next episode actually, I tackle that subject actually head on. So it's been on my mind lately, is the fact that rock and roll as a genre in 2017 isn't a cohesive, unifying genre. There's rock and roll bands, but there isn't something that unifies us all together. So, for example, in heavy metal, you have these unifying hubs like, I don't know, what is it, Revolver Magazine or Decibel or Terrorizer, or Blabbermouth. You have these unifying hubs that keep all these metal bands and the community together. In punk rock, it's, Maximum Rock and Roll and Flipside and Punk News and Warped Tour and Riot Fest, all these, and probably a dozen other things I don't even know about, right, all unifying punk rock together. But rock and roll, not so much. There isn't really anything that unifies rock and roll, whether it's online or whether it's a hard copy of a magazine or whether it's kind of a festival. There's nothing like that. So I feel rock and roll bands are out there, but they're kind of islands unto themselves. And so this episode that I have planned kind of is an attempt to unify and create kind of a scene or a unifying scene where all these bands can kind of exist in a unifying hub. And there's lots of them. There's just no network for them. We try to do our best. When we tour, we take out bands as opening bands that we feel are like-minded in sound and outlook in terms of music. For example, for Fire Music, we took out Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel from London, England, who are probably my favorite rock band out there right now.
Nice.
We took out Judah from Rome, Italy, who are fantastic. I mean, they're just probably the best guitar-based rock and roll band out there too. I mean, those two bands alone. 77 from Barcelona, Spain. We took them out. We took out Dead Lord from, I believe, Stockholm, Sweden. We took out the Amorettes. We're taking out Audrey Horn for this upcoming March tour from Bergen, Norway. All these great rock and roll bands. And in the past, we've taken out Tokyo Dragons, the Biters from Atlanta, Georgia. So this is kind of, something that I really like to do. We've gained a certain amount of success, enough to tour on our own. So when we have a chance to have opening bands, we want to make sure that it's a good package. And so they're out there. I can list another 10 amazing rock bands that people should go check out, because it's hard to find them. Rock and roll doesn't have its own blabbermouth,
Yeah, no, I totally get that point. And it's not like the labels are really doing a huge amount of pushing when it comes to rock, because you're right. It has fallen back in terms of popularity. And something I find interesting about you is that this is your profession. You are a rock and roller, and you're brutally honest and very candid about the state of it. So when you see these new bands that are bubbling up that you want to take under your wing, does part of you feel like they might be not necessarily in the best field they could be because rock is falling backwards? Or do you think that there is potential for another kind of set of iconic bands like we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
No, I don't think there ever will be. I mean, rock and roll has had its time, and it's done. Everybody's kind of, Black Sabbath ended their band last week, for God's sake. So,
crazy.
yeah, things are coming to an end, but that doesn't mean it's over completely. It just means it's over as a kind of a top shelf mainstream form of music. What rock and roll will do in the next 10 to 20 years is fade into the background. So it will go underground, which is exactly what the music, the spirit of the music, in essence, kind of purports to be, which is an outsider, a rebel kind of music. So to me, rock and roll becoming underground and going the way of jazz fits it just fine. It's never going to be a top shelf A level type of musical act. It won't be ever on the level of a Lady Gaga or a Metallica or a U2 or a Jay-Z or a Beyonce. It'll never be on that level of popularity ever again. Once, these big bands that have been around for 30 plus years end. And that's fine, because that's what rock and roll is all about. Rock and roll is about freedom. And the spirit of rock and roll is not a popular outlook of life. It's this kind of lone rebel kind of, this is the idealistic kind of view of rock and roll. And being underground and being in the shadows and being kind of a new kind of outsider form of music, that's, I think, its rightful place.
That's very interesting, and it is rock and roll. Also, I mean, you're right. It's also about the moment, and that's a big thing. And you're right. I mean, rock did have a huge time in music history, and the '70s will always be the '70s and will always be remembered. But it's interesting that you don't think it's going to continue. I was talking to a guest about this yesterday, and he was saying that in his opinion, the music industry isn't dying; it's just starting up again. So I was just curious to see, what are your thoughts on services like Spotify and Apple Music? Is that the new resurgence of the music industry, or is it going to kill what we know it to be today?
I actually agree with that. The music industry, people have been saying, "Oh, it's dying, it's dying." They've been saying this for the last 10 years, and nothing seems to be going away. In fact, there's more bands out there now. There's more records being put out there now. It's just the way people related to music, the way people interacted with the music is going to die. There's no records, like the record HMV just went bankrupt in Canada just a couple of weeks ago. So that is going to be an old way. It is in the hands of Spotify and Apple Music and iTunes and Bandcamp and SoundCloud, all these new kind of ways to get music. I mean, that's, of course, what spawned the vinyl resurgence. But even the vinyl resurgence, I think, is a blip on the map. I mean, I think this is just a temporary or a last gasp, so to speak. But yeah, eventually music is going to just be, but it's not going to die. It's going to change. It's transitioning right now. And for the last, I'd say, 15 years, people have been trying to figure out how to, commodify this kind of music amidst downloading. But this is how they're doing it. And it's not going to yield like millions and millions and millions of dollars in record labels' pockets like it used to, I suppose. You're never going to see like record release parties that, cost $250,000 to pull off anymore.
With the champagne and the whole thing.
Yeah, that's all gone. And who needed it anyways, really? I mean, weren't we all there for the music? When I transitioned myself from being just simply a consumer of music to going behind the curtain, being in this band and seeing the music industry from a different point of view, I realized, and it shocked me, that a lot of the people who are in the music industry as like workers in various fields, music isn't even an interest of theirs. I thought, in the music industry, it's filled with people who are like voracious music fanatics. But such is not the case. Those you stumble on those, here and there. They're out there, but not as many as I thought there was going to be when I stepped behind the curtain. I was really surprised. So after all these years, when I see somebody or I notice somebody who knows a lot about music and is in the music industry, I try to gravitate towards those people. Those people are very interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how the people who really don't know a whole lot about it seem to have some of the most crucial jobs in it.
Yeah, but that's how it is. That's life, I suppose. This is just the topsy-turvy world we're living in.
Definitely, no doubt about that. You mentioned Black Sabbath ending their final tour. How did that make you feel as a metal fan?
I guess it's sad that, they're done, but to me, Sabbath stopped and started many times before last week. I mean, they went through so many eras. I think there's 7 singers in the whole history, and different eras. It's enough to. And plus, Bill Ward wasn't part of the last show, so it's sad that they're done and they won't be touring as Sabbath, but they weren't really like super active, and then suddenly they stopped either. Yeah. Ozzy was doing a solo career for years and years and years and years. So it's an odd feeling. Like it's like, oh, it's done. Oh, that's sad. But at the same time, it's not too much of a shock.
Right.
Like another band probably would if they would suddenly say, hey, we're hanging it up. So to me, yeah, I don't know. Bill Ward wasn't there, so it's odd as well. But I don't take sides, so whatever.
Right. Yeah, I found it kind of odd too, especially since it was in Birmingham. You'd think that he would make an appearance at least. But you're right. I mean, if they finished this tour and they didn't call this the end tour and it was just a regular tour, what would we really be expecting from them after this tour at this point anyway? I mean, I think you have a point there.
I think it was a year or two ago, Neil Peart from Rush, he, I guess, quietly retired. Mm-hmm. And people were up in arms. They're like, "Oh, why did he have to retire?" And I went online and I said, "Let the guy rest. I mean, he's put in the time. Like, what more do you want?"
Yeah.
Like there's got to be a certain point where a musician can just go, "Okay, I stop." And the luxury of doing that, to afford him that, I mean, man, if we could all be able to do that at that age, I mean. What do you want Ozzy Osbourne to do? You want him to sing until he just like falls over? I sure don't.
Yeah, me either.
I mean, I don't think his kids would either. So I think that it's good they were able to stop when they were on top. And when a band wants to end, they should have the right to end and stop and do something else.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sure you've been asked this as well, but moving on to one of the current tours that's going to be kicking off in North America, Guns N' Roses. Did you ever think they would reunite with Axl and Slash?
Honestly, I did not think that would ever happen. Yeah. We went on tour with GNR in 2010, and I've been around the GNR camp in different forms more than most, and I thought that would never happen. So when I found out that, there are certain things that happen behind the scenes. And when I found out that was happening and we all kind of said to each other, man, they're going to reunite. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, and sure enough, they did. But honestly, I never thought they would do that. So it is a big deal. That Guns N' Roses with Slash and Axl are touring together. So, there had already been kind of like little things that had happened. Duff had played on stage with Axl, prior to the big reunion. So Duff and Axl I knew were cool with each other and all that. And of course, Dizzy's never left the band. He's always been there with Axl. Mm-hmm. So it's cool that, good to see. And then Steven Adler's joined them for a few shows. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's something that I also thought that I would never, ever see, and I'm so happy that I am going to see it. Speaking of things that we're probably never going to see, my video viewers are going to see the poster behind me here. Kiss reunion rumors are now swirling, of course, and to add fuel to the fire, Gene Simmons dropped by Ace Frehley's solo show the other night in Beverly Hills. So I guess just getting it from your opinion, do you think there will ever be a Kiss reunion with the original members?
No.
Yes, I agree.
Paul was on Ace's album, his last solo album last year, and those rumors started when Paul sang on Ace's album. Just because Gene shows up to an Ace show or something, it doesn't mean that they're going to kick Tommy and Eric out.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people want it to happen, but what people are forgetting is Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer at this point in time are way better musicians than Peter, Chris, and Ace Frehley are right now.
Accurate.
So there's no way that Gene and Paul are going to trade in that to go back to how it was and go back to, what was it, 96 when they did the Unplugged, MTV Unplugged, and kicked off this whole reunion thing. I think like within year one of that reunion, there was already cracks showing. And Peter Chris's, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been documented by Paul and Gene and even Ace themselves. Peter Chris's drumming has deteriorated to the point where there's just no way this guy can charge people to watch him play drums. And if he does, like, he's got to have a ghost drummer behind him, which would probably be Eric Singer anyways. But that just can't happen. There's just no way. They've done it so many times since the MTV Unplugged reunion, and it's always failed. There's always been something that's happened behind the scenes. And also Peter's chops just don't match what Kiss music needs in a drummer. So it's just impossible for that to happen. And plus, Paul was the last member of the original four to release an autobiography. Mm-hmm. If you forget about reading the book. Don't even bother reading the book if you don't want to go through it. Just go on YouTube. Someone has taken each bit from Paul Stanley's book where he talks shit about each of the other three guys.
Yeah.
And, with Gene, it's one thing. 40 minutes of Gene talking about how much of an asshole he thinks Gene Simmons is. Ace Frehley is the same. But Peter Criss, man, he just goes on and on about how crazy Peter Criss is.
Very harsh.
Yeah, I think out of the three, Peter Criss got the worst from Paul Stanley. So there's just no way that Paul – I just don't think if there's any bridge that needs to be crossed, it's Paul Stanley with Peter Criss. There's just no way that Paul would settle for having Peter Criss on the drum kit in 2017. And if you go back into the history of Kiss with Peter, before he even left the band the first time, it was already off the rails.
Yeah. And
now they've got Eric Singer, who is like one of the best rock drummers in the industry.
Legend.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about a guy who's played with the greats. He wasn't he even in Sabbath for a time? I mean, he was. Yeah, Alice Cooper as well, and of course Badlands, and I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch of other things. But when Kiss needs to be competitive, there's a lot of bands touring, a lot of people who are out on tour these days. The only way to stay competitive is if you can put on a good show. And I'm sorry, but I don't think Peter Criss can match the level that Paul and Gene ask in a drummer in 2017. So no, I do not think so. Plus, when they got Eric Carr, and then they started to make records with Eric Carr, they really started to musically just up their game. I mean, records like Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up. I mean, those Animalize. I mean, the drumming on Creatures of the Night, like, forget about it.
Insane.
Yeah, like, forget about it. Like, Peter Criss couldn't even do it back then. If he had rejoined the band after Creatures of the Night, he couldn't have even played those songs. So no, I think the level of drumming is so top notch now for Kiss that they've kind of automatically kind of ejected him.
So what about Ace?
I mean, Ace's chops are better than Peter's, but like we're discounting the fact that Tommy Thayer and Gene Simmons are very tight.
Yeah.
And Paul and Tommy as well. But like, I mean, Gene was the one who brought Tommy in through Black and Blue as his like kind of go-to assistant guy. And of course, the guy's a great guitarist. So, and he's got a great look. I mean, he looks the part as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just no way they're going to trade Tommy Thayer, who's got the chops, got the looks, and I mean, has the connection and the relationship that he has with Gene and Paul for Ace Frehley, who has stumbled over and over again. Just because Gene shows up to an Ace show, if anything, it's good. Like, if anything, when I saw that, I thought, you know, it's nice. They're heading into their golden years, and I think they just want to like be cool with each other. You know, they fought so much in the past. Things are coming to an end. And I think Gene and Paul just want to end it on a very positive note and, you know, lend an olive branch. But I think there's just no way in hell they could ever bring them back into the fold as the cat and the spaceman. I mean, even in Peter's book, I'm just so surprised reading Peter's book and talking about when they were in the negotiations for the first reunion tour. I mean, the way Peter handled it and the way Ace handled the business of you know, rejoining the band was terrible.
Horrific.
So, I mean, there's just no way that Gene and Paul want to enter that world again. You know, they've got a nice life. They've got a nice situation. It's kind of on automatic pilot at this point. People will come no matter what. So who cares?
Yeah, and that's so true. I mean, is there necessarily more money to be made if they bring Ace and Peter back? Maybe a little bit, but I'm not going to be seeing them playing 80,000 seat stadiums anymore. I mean, back in '96 they were doing it, and you're right. I mean, Peter, by the end of the reunion tour and more towards the Psycho Circus farewell kind of era, you know, they were if Paul's what he says on his audiobook is correct, they did have, you know, drum tracks that were electronic under his drums and stuff, and they were cobbling together his sound. So I think if people think that he's able to rejoin the band now, like you said in 2017, it's insane. Not gonna happen.
No, it's not gonna happen.
It's a shame. Do you think that Paul was a little bit too harsh on his ex-bandmates there, though? Because I saw people talking in the comment sections of those videos you mentioned, saying that, you know, Paul himself isn't, you know, Eddie Van Halen on the guitar, and he's definitely been having vocal issues lately, too, and charging people to see him. So do you think he's out of line there?
No, I don't. He's the one who spent the most time with those guys. He knows them best. And as someone who's been in a band, you know, living on top of one another or touring with other people, it's hellish if you can't get along with somebody. And when you are trying to keep the boat afloat and they're doing everything in their power to sabotage it, fuck them. I've been in that situation, and I'm that's why I'm always Team Paul, man. I'm Team Paul. I know how that feels. Yeah. I know that feeling of like, you're just like, what are you doing? We worked so hard to get to this point, and you think you're a fucking rock star. You think you can do anything and people will eat it up because you are some sort of god. Fuck you. You know, so I've been in that situation, and I feel for Paul. When I read his book, it was the last of the four, and it was the one book out of the four that I identified with the most. I really felt for Paul the most. Like I liked his book the most, because I could feel that frustration with other members that we've had in our band. I can relate to some of Paul's frustrations.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You've been in his shoes. I mean, I think that he was pretty much right on for the whole thing. I think he was a little bit disrespectful towards Eric Carr, but otherwise I think he was okay.
I'll give you that. There's a few snippets in the book where he didn't have to go there. I think he was trying to paint a bigger picture of Eric. But yeah, maybe not. Maybe that was just the only stumbling fault there. But even that, I was like, well, again, He lived with him. We never lived with him. We lived with the ideal of what Eric Carr was, but we really didn't know who he was. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
met people who've met Eric Carr, and they say, "Oh, he was such a sweetheart, and he was this and he was that." Yeah, but you also didn't work with him. You didn't have to deal with him on a daily basis, in and out. It changes. Everything changes when you live like that. And being in a band with someone, it's so intense. It's more intense than even going out with somebody. Like it's a real kind of a different kind of marriage, or it's different than working with someone in an office. It's just the most intense thing. And if you guys don't get along, man, it's going to be hellish for both of you. But one of you is going to sabotage it, and the other is going to hate you for it. So
Interesting. In your experience, what are some of the main issues that can draw band members apart?
it's all kinds of things. I mean, it's your usual. You're just two different personalities who don't get along. Sometimes, the boredom and the ego of being on the road. Some people acquire habits that are just not good in the long run. Could be good for a night or a weekend, but then suddenly a night and a weekend turn into every day. And so that's not cool. Or you're just drawn to being in a rock band because your ego is that big, and you're so insecure with yourself, and that's what's drawn you into the music industry. And because of that, you wreak havoc on everyone around you. I mean, I've been in that situation too, where people just think that they think they own the world revolves around them, and it doesn't.
Yeah, just because you're in a rock band, that doesn't mean that you are a god. Just because the fans will put that label on you, I would agree that it's not right to let that go to your head.
Wow. Yeah, it happens all the time. And the only way that, we've been able to stay together as a band for all these years is because, we are grounded. We don't take any of it seriously. The only thing we take seriously is the music and the shows. Anything else is nice, but you can't let it go to your head. And I've watched people have it go to their head, and it turns people real ugly.
Yeah, most definitely. Talk to me about your Live at Wacken record, because I think that's super cool. That must have been a dream come true.
Well, we played Vakken in 2015. It was the fourth time we played there. Actually, the first time was in 2006, then 2011. Then I spoke at Vakken. I did spoken word in 2012. And then, yeah, they asked us back in 2015. And I love that festival. It's one of my favorite festivals. And they're so set up there that all we had to do was just play our show, and they were going to record it anyways. So they wanted to put out the show on a DVD and vinyl and CD and stuff. So we just said, cool, yeah, sure. I did commentary for it. They included my 2012 spoken word as a bonus feature on there as well. So it's kind of I've been very public about how much I love Vakken. So it was nice to have us tied in with that festival in such an obvious and dramatic way like that. So that was nice.
Very cool, very cool. And the new record, Wildcat, by the way, folks, comes out on March 3rd, 2017. What can fans expect for the new record?
Well, more of the same. If you dug, it's just hard rock songs, more hard rock songs. Like I said, we returned to Eric Ratz to produce the record, and Eric works out of Vespa Music and Revolution Studios. So we recorded the drums at Revolution and the guitars and vocals at Vespa, just like we did for Fire Music. And it's still Rich Knox on drums, JC on bass, and myself on vocals and guitar. And we just wrote a bunch of new tunes. That's pretty much it. But with Eric, we have this, we have this flow now. We're all on the same page and the same wavelength. So it was really easy to just plug in where we left off with Fire Music and go.
That's awesome. And this lineup kicks ass. Fire Music is aging very well 2 years in. I'm still loving the record. And hopefully I'm going to try to come out to the April 13th, I believe it is, concert in Edmonton to come see you guys.
Yeah, that just got announced today. So yeah, come on out.
Awesome, man. Sounds great. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Cassius.